Dry Creek had always been the kind of town where nothing much happened. The biggest excitement in years was when Old Man Carter's tractor broke down in the middle of Main Street during the 4th of July parade. Jack Sullivan liked it that way. He was a man of routine: wake up, work on his small auto repair shop, grumble at the few customers who came in, and head home to his isolated cabin at the edge of the woods. It was a particularly clear night when everything changed. Jack was on his usual evening walk, a mug of lukewarm coffee in one hand, when a bright streak tore across the sky. At first, he thought it was a shooting star, but the fiery trail grew larger and larger until it crashed into the woods with a deafening boom. The ground shook, and the air smelled of ozone and burnt metal. "Great," Jack muttered, gripping his coffee mug tighter. "Just what this town needs: a meteor to wreck the peace." His curiosity got the better of him, though. Jack wasn't the type to call the authorities unless he absolutely had to. Probably just space junk, he thought, heading toward the crash site. When he arrived, what he saw was anything but junk. A sleek, metallic craft, its surface covered in intricate patterns that shimmered like liquid silver, lay half buried in the earth. Smoke hissed from ruptured vents, and faint blue lights blinked along its hull. Jack's first instinct was to turn around and forget he'd ever seen it. But then he heard a faint whimper. "Damn it," he muttered. Against his better judgment, he stepped closer. The hatch of the spacecraft was partially open, revealing a faint glow inside. As he approached, Jack saw 3 figures huddled together, their large, luminous eyes blinking up at him. They were unmistakably alien. Their skin shimmered like the surface of a pearl, and their slender forms were draped in clothing that looked woven from starlight. The smallest of the 3, a girl with wide, teal-colored eyes, made a soft, melodic sound that Jack couldn't understand. It wasn't just fear he saw in their expressions, it was desperation. Jack scratched his scruffy beard and sighed. "Why me?" he muttered. The logical part of his brain screamed at him to leave, to let someone else deal with this. But something about the way they looked at him, huddled and vulnerable, struck a chord deep inside. The sound of approaching sirens shattered the silence. Jack cursed under his breath. "They're gonna ship you off to some lab if I don't do something." Without thinking too much about it, he waved them forward. "Come on," he said gruffly. "You don't understand me, but you'd better follow me if you don't want to end up on a dissecting table." To his surprise, they seemed to understand. The tallest of the 3, who Jack would later learn was named Lyra, helped the youngest one to her feet. They followed Jack, stumbling slightly as they adjusted to Earth's gravity. Jack led them to his old pickup truck, muttering about how this was the stupidest thing he'd ever done. He bundled them into the cab, their luminous skin dimming as they wrapped themselves in a tattered blanket he kept in the truck bed. The drive back to his cabin was tense. Jack kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting black helicopters to swoop down and block the road. The girls sat silently, their large eyes taking in every detail of their new surroundings. The youngest one, sitting closest to Jack, reached out a delicate hand to touch the dashboard, her expression a mix of awe and curiosity. "Don't touch that," Jack snapped, then sighed. "Sorry. Just don't." When they arrived at his cabin, Jack ushered the girls inside. The place was modest and cluttered, filled with tools, old furniture, and the faint smell of motor oil. It wasn't exactly alien-friendly, but it was safe. "All right," Jack said, standing awkwardly in the middle of the living room. The 3 girls looked at him expectantly. First things first, no glowing, no weird noises, and no wandering outside. "Got it?" They stared at him blankly. Jack rubbed his temples. "Great. This is gonna be a long night." As he rummaged through his kitchen for something that resembled food, Jack couldn't shake the nagging feeling that his quiet life was about to get a whole lot more complicated. And for the first time in years, he wasn't entirely sure that was a bad thing. The morning after the crash felt surreal. Jack Sullivan, the man who had spent most of his adult life actively avoiding other humans, found himself the unlikely caretaker of 3 alien girls. The cabin, usually silent except for the occasional creak of wood or the hum of his ancient refrigerator, was now alive with quiet whispers in an alien language and the occasional soft chime of something metallic being accidentally knocked over. Jack groaned as he shuffled into the kitchen. He hadn't slept a wink, spending most of the night keeping an eye on the trio to make sure they didn't do anything alien. The 3 of them were already awake, gathered around the kitchen table and staring at the odd assortment of items Jack had hastily thrown together for breakfast. A loaf of bread, a jar of peanut butter, and a few bananas sat in the middle of the table like offerings to beings from another world which, Jack supposed, they technically were. The tallest of the 3, who seemed to have taken on a leadership role, was meticulously inspecting the banana. Her iridescent fingers ran over the peel with curiosity. Jack cleared his throat. "That's food," he said gruffly, pointing at the banana. "You eat it. Not play with it." Her luminous eyes darted up to meet his, and then she looked at the banana again. After a moment's hesitation, she bit into it, peel and all. Jack winced. "No, no, no." He lunged forward, snatching the banana away from her. "You're supposed to peel it first." He demonstrated, peeling the banana and handing it back to her. She took a tentative bite and then nodded, her expression softening into what Jack could only describe as delight. The middle one, who had a delicate frame and eyes that sparkled like gold, was more cautious. She picked up a slice of bread and held it up to the light, as though trying to discern its secrets. The smallest, sitting cross-legged on the floor, was already fiddling with the toaster. Jack's eyes widened in panic as he saw her press random buttons. "Hey! No touching that," he barked, lunging to unplug the appliance before she fried herself or worse, burned down his cabin. The youngest one squeaked in alarm and skittered back, her silver-toned skin pulsing faintly with an embarrassed glow. Jack sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "I can't believe I'm saying this, but do you even know how dangerous this planet is?" The 3 girls exchanged glances, murmuring in their melodic language. Jack could feel the weight of their stares as they looked back at him, their expressions a mix of curiosity and confusion. He realized they probably didn't understand a word he was saying, but they were clearly trying to piece it together. "All right," he said, leaning against the counter and crossing his arms. "Let's get some basics down. If you're gonna stay here, you need to follow some rules." The tallest tilted her head, her shimmering hair falling over one shoulder. Jack sighed again. "Rule 1, no glowing. If you're shiny enough to light up a room, people are gonna notice. Rule 2, no touching stuff you don't understand. Especially the toaster. Rule 3. He trailed off, struggling to think of a third rule. Just don't make a mess. They stared at him blankly, then nodded in unison, mimicking his crossed arms in what seemed like an attempt to show understanding. Jack had to stifle a laugh at how serious they looked. As the days passed, Jack's life became a whirlwind of adjustment. The girls, who introduced themselves by pointing to their chests and saying their names Lyra, Mina, and Tali, were quick learners. Within a week, they had picked up basic English words, though their accents were thick and their grammar was shaky at best. Lyra, the eldest, was methodical and curious. She spent hours poring over Jack's old books, flipping through pages with a delicate reverence. Mina, the middle sister, was more tactile. She loved exploring the cabin, touching everything from the wrenches in Jack's toolbox to the coarse fabric of his couch cushions. Tali, the youngest, was a ball of energy. She followed Jack around like a shadow, her silver eyes wide with fascination as she watched him fix cars or chop wood. One afternoon, as Jack was tinkering with an old engine in his shed, Tali appeared at the door, holding something behind her back. Her mischievous grin was unmistakable. "What now?" Jack muttered, wiping grease off his hands. Tali revealed her prize A screwdriver, which she had somehow managed to bend into a perfect spiral. She looked up at Jack, beaming as if she'd just performed the greatest magic trick in the universe. Jack groaned. "Kid, that's not how tools work." Despite the chaos, a strange routine began to form. Jack found himself teaching the girls Earth customs, from how to use forks to the importance of not walking around barefoot in the woods. In return, they shared glimpses of their own culture. Lyra showed him how to use a small, spherical device from their ship that projected holographic images of their home planet H's stunning world of crystalline cities and endless, star-dappled skies. Mina demonstrated how their species could manipulate light, creating delicate, glowing patterns in the air with a wave of her hand. And Tali, ever the curious one, introduced Jack to an alien instrument she had salvaged from the wreckage. Its hauntingly beautiful notes echoed through the cabin, leaving Jack speechless. For the first time in years, Jack's cabin felt alive. It was chaotic, sure, but it was also filled with laughter, music, and the faint hum of discovery. The grumpy loner who had once been content to live in solitude now found himself looking forward to the mornings when the girls would wake him with their clumsy attempts at making breakfast, or the evenings when they'd sit together on the porch, staring at the stars. He didn't want to admit it, but the alien girls had done something he thought impossible. They'd made him care again. And deep down, Jack knew that no matter how much he grumbled, he wasn't just their reluctant guardian. He was their family. Jack Sullivan had thought his life was complicated enough with 3 alien girls hiding in his cabin. But when the search for the crash survivors intensified, he realized that keeping them hidden would take more than just locking the door and praying the government didn't come knocking. He had to teach them how to blend in. It wasn't going to be easy. The clothes dilemma. The first challenge was clothing. The girls' shimmering, starlight-woven attire might have been breathtaking, but it screamed extraterrestrial louder than any spaceship ever could. Jack drove to the nearest thrift store one rainy morning, dragging Lyra, Mina, and Tali along for the ride. "This," Jack said, holding up a faded hoodie, "is what people wear around here. You need to look normal." Lyra inspected the hoodie like it was some ancient artifact. "Hoodie," she said, her English coming along slowly but surely. Jack smirked. "Close enough." The youngest, Tali, darted into a rack of children's clothes and emerged with a bright pink shirt featuring a cartoon unicorn. She held it up proudly, her silver eyes glimmering with excitement. Jack groaned. "You're supposed to blend in, not stand out." Mina, ever the curious one, picked up a pair of jeans and frowned as she stretched the fabric between her hands. "Earth clothes. Strange." "No stranger than glowing dresses," Jack muttered. "Now hurry up. People around here already think I'm weird. They see me shopping for a bunch of kids, and they're gonna start asking questions." After an hour of haggling over what counted as normal, they left with a mishmash of jeans, t-shirts, and oversized sweaters. Jack didn't think they'd win any fashion awards, but at least they wouldn't look like refugees from another galaxy. Language lessons. Back at the cabin, Jack began teaching the girls more English. They were quick learners, but their melodic, alien accents often transformed simple words into musical phrases. Jack started small, pointing at objects around the house. "Table," he said, tapping the surface. "Tabul," Lyra repeated, her voice lilting. "Chair," he continued. "Cheer," Mina echoed, dragging the vowel like a song. "Dog," he said as his neighbor's mud wandered into the yard. "Doog," Tali sang, clapping her hands. Jack sighed. Close enough. They practiced phrases, too. Lyra mastered, "Hello, my name is Lyra," while Mina proudly declared, "I am Mina." Tali, however, got stuck on "I like pizza," pronouncing it "I love pizza" in a way that made Jack laugh despite himself. Their language lessons were filled with missteps and laughter, but over time, they improved. The girls' excitement to learn reminded Jack of how much he'd taken his own world for granted. A trial run in town. Once he thought they were ready, Jack decided to test the girls' ability to blend in. He brought them to Dry Creek's Farmers Market, a bustling hub where the locals sold everything from fresh produce to handmade trinkets. The plan was simple: walk around, buy a few things, and leave without drawing attention. Rule 1, Jack said as they parked the truck. No glowing. Rule 2, speak as little as possible. Rule 3, don't wander off. Lyra, Mina, and Tali nodded solemnly, though Jack could see the excitement in their eyes. They'd spent weeks cooped up in the cabin, and the prospect of exploring was clearly thrilling. At first, things went smoothly. The girls stuck close to Jack, marveling at the colorful stalls and the assortment of smells wafting through the air. Tali was particularly enchanted by a stall selling baked goods and tugged on Jack's sleeve to point at a tray of muffins. "You want one?" Jack asked, fishing a few bills from his pocket. "Muffin," Tali said proudly, earning a chuckle from the vendor. But then, as Jack turned to pay, Mina wandered off, drawn by the sound of a street musician strumming a guitar. By the time Jack noticed, she was standing in the middle of a small crowd, clapping in time with the music. "Mina," Jack hissed, weaving through the crowd to reach her. "What did I say about wandering off?" Mina looked up at him, her golden eyes wide with innocence. "Music. Beautiful. Yeah, well, you can appreciate it from a distance. Come on." He grabbed her hand and started to lead her away, but not before the musician winked and said, "Your kid's got good taste, mister." Jack grumbled something about nosy musicians and herded the girls back to the truck. They'd survived the market without any major incidents, but Jack's nerves were shot. Still, as they drove home, the girls chatted excitedly in their mix of English and their native tongue, thrilled by their first real glimpse of Earth. A growing bond. That evening, as the girls helped him unload the groceries, Jack realized just how much they'd adapted. Lyra carefully unpacked the vegetables, arranging them neatly on the counter. Mina examined a jar of peanut butter, murmuring Earth food with a mixture of awe and amusement. Tali, ever the ball of energy, hummed a tune she'd heard from the street musician, tapping her fingers rhythmically against the table. Jack leaned against the doorway, watching them with a faint smile. For all the chaos they'd brought into his life, they'd also filled it with something he hadn't felt in years: purpose. "Well," he said, clearing his throat, "I guess you three didn't do too bad today." Lyra looked up from her task, her shimmering hair catching the light. "Thank you, Jack." Her words were simple, but the warmth in her voice was unmistakable. Jack felt a lump form in his throat. He wasn't used to gratitude, at least, not like this. Yeah, he muttered, waving her off. "Don't get used to it." But as he turned away, he couldn't help but smile. For the first time in years, his cabin wasn't just a place to live. It was becoming a home. Months had passed since the crash, and Jack's once quiet cabin was now a hive of activity. What started as an uneasy coexistence had blossomed into something Jack never expected: a family. The girls had grown comfortable in their new lives, and Jack had begrudgingly become their protector, teacher, and for all intents and purposes their father. The calm before the storm. It was a cool autumn evening, and Jack stood on the cabin's porch, sipping his coffee as the last rays of sunlight dipped below the horizon. Inside, laughter spilled out through the open window as the girls tried their hand at making dinner. It was Mina's idea to experiment with Earth recipes, which usually resulted in some bizarre but oddly delicious concoctions. "Jack!" Tali called from the kitchen, her silver eyes peeking out from the doorway. "What is paprika?" Jack chuckled, shaking his head. "It's a spice, kid. Should be in the cabinet. And don't use too much, or dinner's gonna taste like a campfire." Tali disappeared back inside, and Jack heard Lyra scolding her for nearly spilling a jar of flour. Their voices mingled, filling the cabin with a warmth Jack hadn't felt in years. He took another sip of coffee, savoring the moment. But his peace was interrupted by the low rumble of an approaching vehicle. Jack's muscles tensed as he saw a black SUV pull up the gravel driveway. He set his coffee down and stepped off the porch, his mind racing. No one ever visited him, and the black SUV could only mean trouble. The driver's door opened, and a man in a crisp suit stepped out, his face as unreadable as his mirrored sunglasses. "Jack Sullivan?" the man asked, his tone flat. "Who's asking?" Jack replied, crossing his arms. The man produced a badge. "Agent Carson. Department of Defense. We're following up on the incident in the woods a few months back." Jack's heart sank, but he kept his expression neutral. "I don't know anything about that." "Neighbors reported strange activity near your property," Carson continued, ignoring Jack's denial. "Unusual lights, strange noises. Mind if we take a look around?" "Yeah, I mind," Jack said, his voice firm. "You got a warrant?" Carson didn't flinch. "Not yet. But we can get one." Jack stared him down, his mind scrambling for a plan. "You do that," he said finally, turning on his heel and heading back toward the cabin. "But until then, get off my property." Escape plan inside, the girls were already waiting for him, their faces pale. They must have heard the conversation, and Jack didn't need to explain what was at stake. "Are we in danger?" Lyra asked, her English now fluent enough to convey her fear. Jack nodded grimly. "Yeah. We need to move. Now." The girls scrambled to gather their things, their movements hurried but silent. Jack grabbed the emergency duffel bag he'd packed weeks ago, just in case. It held essentials, food, water, some cash, and a map marked with potential hiding spots. As they loaded into his old pickup truck, Jack glanced back at the cabin. It had been his sanctuary for years, a place where he could avoid the world. Now, it felt like he was leaving behind more than just a house. He was leaving a home. On the run. Jack drove through the back roads, avoiding main highways and doubling back to throw off anyone who might be following. The girls sat quietly, their faces a mix of fear and determination. Tolly clutched a small bag that jingled faintly with trinkets she'd refused to leave behind. "Where we go?" Mina asked, her voice trembling. Jack tightened his grip on the wheel. "There's an old hunting cabin about 50 miles from here. It's off the grid. We'll lay low there for a while." The drive was long and tense, but they finally arrived at the remote cabin just before dawn. It was smaller than Jack's place, with a leaky roof and an old wood stove for heat. But it was safe, or at least safer than staying in Dry Creek. The girls settled in quickly, adapting to their new surroundings with their usual curiosity. Tolly found a dusty radio and spent hours fiddling with it, while Lyra and Mina explored the nearby woods, gathering berries and leaves that reminded them of home. Jack watched them from a distance, his heart heavy. They deserved better than this life on the run. The decision. Weeks turned into months, and the world seemed to forget about the crash. The government search quieted, and Dry Creek returned to its usual sleepy rhythm. But Jack knew it was only a matter of time before someone came looking again. One evening, as they sat around the fire, Lyra broke the silence. "Jack," she said softly, "we can't keep running." Jack looked at her, his jaw tightening. "You think I don't know that? But what's the alternative? Turn you in? Let them lock you up in some lab?" Lyra shook her head. "No. We find our way home." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Jack had known this day would come, but hearing it out loud felt like a punch to the gut. "I can't lose you," he admitted, his voice cracking. "You're all I've got." Lyra placed a hand on his arm, her touch light but steady. "You gave us more than we could ever hope for. A home. Family. But it's time for us to go." Jack swallowed hard, nodding reluctantly. "How?" Mina held up a small, glowing device, something salvaged from the wreckage of their ship. "We've been working on it," she said. "It will call for help." The goodbye. The night they activated the device was bittersweet. They stood together in the clearing behind the cabin, the device pulsing with a faint blue light. The girls hugged Jack tightly, their tears shimmering like starlight on their cheeks. "We'll never forget you," Tali whispered, her voice trembling. "Yeah," Jack said, his throat tight. "You better not." When the ship arrived, its sleek, crystalline form descending silently from the heavens, Jack felt an ache he couldn't describe. He watched as the girls stepped aboard, their luminous figures casting long shadows in the moonlight. As the ship rose into the sky, Jack stood alone in the clearing, staring up at the stars. He felt their absence keenly, but he also felt something else, pride. He'd done right by them, even if it meant letting them go. A new beginning. The next morning, Jack returned to his old cabin, now empty and eerily quiet. He sat on the porch, sipping his coffee, and looked out at the woods where it had all begun. The world thought the crash survivors were gone. And in a way, they were. But Jack knew better. They weren't just survivors, they were his girls, his family. And no matter where they were in the galaxy, he knew they'd always carry a piece of him with them.